Okay, so I think we'll get started. So good morning, everyone. On behalf of the France Island Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to welcome you to this event this morning. I'm so happy also to see many participants. I believe we've 100+ joining us this morning, and all representing members of the France Island Chamber of Commerce and the various associations, including, of course, the French Embassy, that are an integral part of the Franco-Irish business ecosystem. And today, Margot Slattery, who is the president of the France Island Chamber of Commerce, will discuss a number of topics with Commissioner Mairéad McGuinness, including, but not exclusively, COVID-19, leadership, Brexit, and the financial sector from the EU perspective. But before we move to this discussion, I'm very happy to welcome His Excellency Vincent Guérin, who is the Ambassador of France to Ireland. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining us this morning, and I think you're going to just give us a few words of welcome.
Thank you very much, Cleona. Thank you indeed, and thank you to Margot too. Thank you for inviting me to participate. Commissioner, it's a great pleasure and honor indeed to welcome you at this webinar organized by the Franco-Irish Chamber of Commerce in Dublin. As French ambassador to Ireland, I'm extremely pleased that you accepted to join us for this webinar. I certainly understand very well the very busy schedule which is yours as a commissioner. As I just hinted, I had myself a chance to spend 5 years in the European Commission in the Berlaymont building, the headquarters, as a deputy head of cabinet of a commissioner under the so-called Barroso I Commission in 2004-2009. It's quite long ago, but I have a very vivid memories of these very intense and sometimes hectic days dealing with so many issues in the commission. It was extremely enriching and motivating. But so I very much understand what the pressure on the shoulders of a commissioner dealing with so many issues related to portfolio, but also related to other portfolios, as one says, and related certainly to Ireland. So reading also your the letter which the President von der Leyen sent you when you took office, and reading your own agenda, one can see the extreme breadth and depth and vision of your agenda. Just to name a few things: completing the banking union, completing the capital market union, developing green financing strategy, proposing a fintech strategy, ensuring that the common approach on cryptocurrencies exists between member states, etc., etc. So it's extremely rich, extremely, of course, topical for European economy these days. And so I think our members will be very, very interested to hear you explain us more how you intend to unfold this extremely important agenda. Just a few words on the Franco-Irish Chamber of Commerce. You probably know from before. It's a very dynamic group, and I'm very grateful for both Margot Slattery, its president, and Cleona, its director, for steering the group so well and for bringing together so many and interesting webinars, seminars during the year. Indeed, there are many commercial and economic links between France and Ireland, and we want to expand them even further. Now, as France, as we say, has become Ireland's closest EU neighbor in an EU with 27 member states. And this has been also very well illustrated, as you may know, Commissioner, with the fast expansion of direct maritime links between France and Ireland since early January, which allow goods from Ireland and indeed also Northern Ireland to go straight to the mainland, to the rest of the single market without any, let's say, paperwork or controls which the language may require. And so this is just one illustration, but we're indeed embarked into an even closer partnership with the so-called action plan, which both government, the French and the Irish, intends to develop in the coming weeks. This is what I want to say, to tell you, Commissioner, and the members as a kind of frame. But now I'll pass the floor and just say again how pleased, privileged we are to welcome you today. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And now, just before I pass over to Margot, just like to mention that we did get a number of questions in advance for Commissioner Mairéad McGuinness, and we will also give you the opportunity. There's a chat button at the bottom that you can use for questions. We will try our best to get to them at the end of the discussion. But now I'll pass over to Margot, who's President of the France-Ireland Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Margot.
Thank you, Cleona, and good morning, everybody. And thank you so much, Ambassador. Really appreciate you taking the time out to welcome and set the scene, so to speak. I'm just going to quickly introduce Commissioner McGuinness, who, as I think you've outlined, is the Commissioner for Financial Services, Financial Stability and Capital Markets Union. And the Commissioner's vision for the portfolio is focused on ensuring the financial sector's strength and stability, that it can deliver for people, society and the environment. And before joining the Commission in October 2020, Ms McGuinness was first Vice President of the European Parliament from 2017, and then she has served previous to that as an MEP from Ireland for 16 years, of which we're all very proud, and was a Vice President of the Parliament since 2014. So with that introduction, Mairéad, if it's okay if I call you Mairéad, we'll probably get down to business, so to speak. And the first question is not too bad. We're going to be celebrating International Women's Day on the 8th of March, as most of the world does. What do you think are the effects of COVID on the advancement of gender balance in the European states, and the Commission's perspective on this from both a financial and societal impact?
Well, good morning, everyone. Bonjour. Ambassador, you have more experience in the Commission than I have, so I'm really interested to hear of your experience. But obviously this question about COVID and the impact on societies, but in particular on women, is well discussed, because we know that there has been a disproportionate negative impact on women because of COVID. And maybe to step back and say that the developed world, of which Europe is a part, was completely unprepared for a public health, a global health pandemic. And I think we should learn the lesson of that and realize that we need, for the future, never to get caught like we were in this last year. And I think there is that lesson. And related to that is the reality that there is a strong public good in investing in public health. Because, you know, many member states couldn't invest in health because they had all sorts of other issues to deal with. Suddenly, when the public health crisis demanded investment, we invested. So maybe there's a lesson, and I hope we do learn from that. Secondly, I think we should also take heart with how we responded. Initially in the European Union, a little bit of disjointed maneuvering, if you like, around supply chains, a lot of anxiety. But in the end, and thanks to the leadership, I would say, of the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, pulling people together, making us understand that we're stronger together, whether it's delivering PPE and indeed vaccines, although there are some concerns about the flow of vaccines, but it is beginning now to work and work well. Back to the point about women. You know, women work in some of the sectors that are least visible, but the most important. So, for example, in our hospitals, in our care homes, these are the women who are absolutely vital. And their work is not often rewarded. You see it too around the food supply chain, migrant workers who pick fruit, all of these things, many of them women as well. So I think that the COVID-19 crisis should really strengthen our resolve to look at these issues around gender and its impact, and learn the lesson of how we ignore and perhaps don't see the really important people around us, because they're not, if you like, a director or whatever. They're one of, if you like, a team keeping us all going. And I hope it would give us more appreciation for those jobs like caring, that are not as well paid as they should be, and realize how vital they are. And one of the saddest part for me about the entire COVID early days was the healthcare, the homes, the older people, the nursing homes, if you like, where, you know, we lost many lives in nursing homes, and equally for the workers there who would have been working between different homes. and who also didn't live in facilities that allowed them the space that we have or the capacity to do all of these things, like live separately. And I think we've learned from that, and I think that will have to change. And I suppose at this point, I think we're all probably a bit tired and anxious about all of what has unfolded. We're a year to the day almost. The sun is shining where I am. I gather it's shining in Ireland. I'm sure it's shining in France. That maybe what we need is hope. But I don't want us to go back to the way we were last January of 2020. I want us to take the lessons of COVID around the gender impact, around children, around young people, around environment, all of those things that are so crucial. And in one sense, I initially thought this is a setback for women, and it is to some extent, but it also is a moment where we can say, look, these things are not right, and we need to act more swiftly. My last remark is that very often when we talk about women, we refer to women in high office, and there's no doubt that the representation of women in boards and at executive level in the area I work in finance, is quite minimal. I've often been on a meeting, Ambassador, you're I think the minority in the meeting, but I've been at meetings where at the end of the meeting, I will say, am I the only woman on screen? And it's funny how many don't notice that until you say it. And then there's a sense of, oh yes, actually you are. And you know, I come from a background of growing up in a family where there were strong women. So I don't want to be handed something, but nor do I think that we should be denied access, because there is obviously this issue of if you don't see women in roles, they won't have those roles. But equally, those who get into a position of influence or leadership have a duty to make sure they don't neglect women who play different roles in society. And sometimes I think there is a bit of neglect there because, as I said, those sectors are vital but invisible. So I remember chairing one of my last debates, perhaps in the Parliament, where we were talking about this whole women's issue and the role of women in society. And I made that very point. I said, those of us who have a voice, who have a microphone, have to talk for other women, but also understand where they are coming from. And a more balanced world, gender-wise, diversity-wise, I mean, these will help us all deal with some of the issues that not only COVID has thrown up, but also political issues and tensions that exist in society. So yeah, it's been a wake-up call. It's been a tragedy for many women. And I think that, you know, maybe in a year's time, when we will look back, we might say we've learned this and we will not let it happen again. And I think from the European Union's point of view, and this was before I got involved in politics, I always felt and saw where Europe dealt with the crisis, it then stepped up a gear, if you like, and was better prepared for the next one. And I think that's something positive to hold on to.
No, excellent, thank you. And I think, like you, I believe that hope is really needed. And essentially this morning, when you look out and spring is sprung, so to speak, I think it gives us all that way forward, but learning and mindful of the lessons. Our next question was, and again, I'm reading these as they come from our audience. How do you manage the pressures from the permanent staff in the EU, and what leadership traits do you have which help you in doing this?
I wonder, should you ask them how they manage me or how they put up with me, because I'm quite a hands-on person, and I'm somebody who likes to know not just the summary and conclusions, but the inside story. So I'm never quite happy, and you laugh at this, particularly the ambassador. I hope you'll enjoy it. I remember coming into this big office. It's a big office, and the desk was made for a bigger person than I. So I'm in the corner of this massive office, and the world was going on somewhere else. And then I'd hear things at the end. This was in the first weeks. And I said, oh, no, this isn't how I work. I need to be in the center of things. I need to hear the noise, the arguments, the comings and goings. And I'm more comfortable with that, particularly in a portfolio where there is so much happening and evolving, whether it's sustainable finance or digital or, I mean, there's so many different things to know about. So I've now got my place. Physically, I'm still here, but they know that I'm actually in the corridor, and I'm really keen to listen, and I have an open door. In terms of leadership, I suppose leadership, I think, is about listening. And it's about also having a focus. It's about making sure that everybody on the team, and we're a new team, I've brought been able to bring some of my key people from the Parliament, and that's really been a help. But equally, I'm working with new people who are absolutely fantastic. And I think what you need to do, and I hope I did this, and maybe you can talk to them afterwards, but it was to make sure that we all feel part of this team, to understand that, okay, I've come in a year late into the Commission, so I don't have time to waste. And that's the one thing I don't do. I don't waste time. I think time is really precious. I think those of us who are in a position where we can influence change, or listen and support, have a duty to use every single moment in an effective way. I would have done that in the Parliament, and I think one of the reasons I did get elected as first Vice President was obviously not because there were loads of Irish voting for me, I hope they all did, but because I had a capacity to work with others. And I learned that on day one in the Parliament. I would really be quite an impatient person and wanting to get things done. And then the first meeting in the Parliament, I realized you need to listen, and you need to find a way to intervene where you acknowledge the other side's issue and then hope to get support for your position. And I think that has stood me well. And I think part of leadership is letting people speak and then pulling it together. I think leadership at the moment is also about looking after people's well-being, their mental health and their physical health. We have colleagues, even interns, who are living in apartments on their own. And I'm conscious that that's not a nice place to be when you're young. You want to be out and mixing. So we try and kind of look after each other. I probably spend more time on my own now at weekends because I don't travel home because travel is quite difficult. But I get on well with myself at this age, so it's not too bad. But it isn't easy for everybody in that situation. So I suppose you pick up skills with age as well. And I would never ask somebody to do something that I'm not prepared to do myself. And I think maybe that is reflected in people who see that I'm willing to do things, whether it's printing or running down the corridor with something. And I like the idea of teamwork. I would say that I'm quite fastidious on detail. I've mentioned that earlier. And I probably got that working for a very short space of time with the late Gay Byrne on the Late Late Show as a researcher. And I remember he would build these jigsaws in the break. This was a television program in Ireland to our French colleagues. And he would expect a researcher to check that this was working before we went live, but he always checked himself. And I think that's part of, I suppose it's a bit of a perfectionist thing as well, but it's also a cautionary side that we need to make sure things work. And in my area, which is financial services, which is a very big part of our economy, and in fact will be the enabler of great change, and I hope we can talk about that, we really need to pay attention to the detail, to listen to business, farmers, citizens, environmental organizations. So I'm a bit like a sponge at the moment, absorbing information. And I think it's a very privileged place to be able to take all this information and then to, with your own judgment and counsel from others, try and see a path forward which brings as many as possible on board. It's not easy, but we're managing thus far.
Oh, thank you, Mairéad. And I think, like so many of us, that Irish sense of being able to be calm and listen and take on board, and the respect, and I hear very much about respect there, and that attention to detail that has stood you in good stead. So I think that gives everyone a sense of comfort about your ability to take on the challenges. Just maybe one more sort of Irish question, and then we'll really go into the finance part. But the pull from national politics, so national Irish politics, is that difficult to manage at times?
No, I haven't found that difficult. And even when I was in the European Parliament, I think the strongest days of Europe for me, and it was quite emotional when I heard it, during Brexit, that colleagues from other member states would stand up in the European Parliament and talk about the island of Ireland and the particular issues around that and the need to find solutions. And it was a real awakening moment where I thought, this is what we should do as Irish members of the European Parliament, speak where there are issues of concern for other member states, whether it's rule of law or whatever. And I think that's the value of Europe, is the solidarity that comes with people finding out what the issue is for a colleague in another member state, and then working with you to try and support it. I mean, in terms of my role now and the pull, I don't find a pull, but of course you're aware of issues that are happening in Ireland. You're aware of issues that are happening across the European Union. You're here to serve the European Union. But I think what all of us bring, all of the commissioners, is our own whatever skill sets, but also where we come from and how that fits with the overall narrative within the union itself. But I don't find it a difficulty at all. I think, I mean, I still speak to all of my constituents who would have elected me into the European Parliament. So anyone that calls me, I always take the call and listen to them. And I like that connection. I've always had a sense in which that if you physically or mentally remove yourself from where people are, you lose that contact. And I don't want to do that, because I want to make sure that what I do has a purpose, not just a system that keeps, you know, feeding itself, but it has a purpose for people. And one of the things that I was very strong on during my hearing and subsequently is around financial literacy, financial education. I mean, I did accountancy and I did business and finance, but had I not done those at school, I wouldn't really have an awful lot of financial skills. And with the digitalization of everything and everything much more speedy, I think we need to talk about financial literacy in this new era. So that's about connecting with people. And I think if I didn't have that sense that what I'm doing has a real purpose, I wouldn't find it challenging. Whereas I actually realized that this area in the Commission, which in the past was quite, you know, technical and fringe, financial services out there, I think the financial crisis, the previous one, woke us up to the fact that we didn't have enough oversight. That has improved. The banks were much better going into this crisis than obviously the previous one because of regulation. And what we're doing now around many of the issues about sustainable finance and other things are absolutely key to everything we will do as a union, but even globally. So it does give me that sense that, you know, when I get up in the morning, there's a real sense of purpose. And I really, you know, I value that. And I think the team here value that as well. And they understand their part in all of this, if you like, in facilitating change.
No, excellent. And I agree with you on the sense of valuing our financial knowledge. And, you know, I've just seen in the past week, even around Ulster Bank, you know, people asking questions and being much more aware. And I think with environmental concerns now, it's about closing the circle on that and understanding that everything's connected. So if we just sort of, I suppose, these are the questions that have come really more about finance. The first one is, how likely is an equivalent deal in the financial services post-Brexit, given that the equivalence is largely based on trust, and that seems to be pretty thin on the ground? So it's a long one, but I leave it with you.
Yeah, and there's lots of component parts. So maybe just step back a little and then I'll go to the detail. As you know, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement was about trade, not financial services. I mean, both sides understood that very well. We have in the attached to that agreement, agreement on the two sides. So the UK and the European Union want to have a memorandum of understanding agreed by the end of March. And we're working towards that. Our technical people are working on the details of it, with a view then to dealing with all of the issues that come under the umbrella of financial services. So to the question itself, trust is hugely important, but to some extent, maybe because I have a media background and I've moved to politics many years ago, that, you know, if you react to the noise of today, you will not achieve anything you want to tomorrow. So you have to be very, as you say, calm. I'm not always calm, I have to say, but you have to at least sometimes breathe in and say, well, look, don't take everything you're hearing or reading in a way which disturbs what needs to be done for people. So I always pull back a little. I think we need, of course, to have a very strong relationship generally with the United Kingdom. I had a very good meeting this morning with the president-designate of COP26, so UK colleague, really good meeting, and that's how it should be. On financial services, because there's no agreement, we really have a lot of work to do. There was no disruption in the financial system on January the 1st because we had already prepared. So those areas where we needed to grant equivalence, we did. We've seen, of course, share trading move to the European Union. I think that was anticipated. It wasn't a surprise. We have issues around derivatives, which we need to look at as well. So I don't think you're going to see us sitting down maybe in April and with the entire list and working through it on the day. From our side, it will be a case of looking at areas where we absolutely need equivalence and we think we should grant it. That's what the UK have done to date. So I think it will be on that basis. But I do not see this as a race between us. Some of the media commentary would be around that. My role is to ensure financial stability. and my role is within the European Union, and we have to work with our UK colleagues around financial stability, which is a global issue as well. We will probably work very well with our UK colleagues on sustainable finance, on many things within the brief. So it isn't going to be the same as what our wonderful colleague Michel Barnier did over a number of months, and there was coming and going. Around trust, it's built with time and also delivery. And I think maybe the questioner is referring to perhaps just how things are happening in Ireland and Northern Ireland and some of the concerns there. But I think if you're mature, and I think both sides should be, that we will build trust. And where trust isn't there, it's certainly true you cannot make progress. But I'm still quite hopeful that we can and have to and need to build a good relationship with the United Kingdom. I mean, I do read commentary, but I'm less inclined to react immediately. You know, sometimes if you step back a little, it doesn't seem so bad if you read it twice. Headlines can sometimes cause a little bit of disturbance, but you know, we have more work to do than just respond to headlines. Now, having said that, Brexit is a very disruptive event. When the referendum happened in 2016, I hate to say that I predicted that this would happen. I had no sense from the campaign that the message about Europe was in any way strong. It's much easier to kick Europe, and we still know that that is the case. We tend not to react in the same way, but however, the past is as it is. We have to live with the reality of Brexit, respect that the UK made the decision. But equally, I think we also need to understand, and indeed, I think within the UK, some sectors are beginning to understand what a single market and the customs union meant and their absolute value in terms of movement of goods and services and freedoms. And then when you pull away from that, not only do you lose all of those, but you have to recreate something else, including your entire regulatory framework. And the UK were very much part of developing all the regulatory framework. So in a way, I think maybe history can make a better judgment than we can now, but we need to know why this happened, and we need to understand that it was real. And I think for the strength of Europe itself, and even this conversation, I mean, Ireland and France, we need to be stronger together as well. You are the closest neighbour, a very valued and friend, and I am learning French. I'm on day 334. I haven't missed a day, even Christmas Day, but don't test me, Ambassador. But I do think it's important, and I should mention languages in particular. I think Ireland has a job of work to do around language, and I wanted to say that very, very publicly. So yes, I think we will build relationships with the UK, but there won't be an agreement within 3 months on everything. There will be over time some commitments on some areas of the financial system. And there's also an understanding that what we issues around financial stability, we need to regulate those ourselves. We can't rely on a third country to be the regulator. So there are changes.
No, and you know, it was very much reflected. Thank you, Mairéad. It was reflected in a conversation I read in the editorial in the FT last weekend around that whole piece of the single market and recreating. But at the very centre of everything comes back to trust and purpose and seeing a way forward. A question again from our audience: how should Europe, and in particular Ireland, maximise the opportunities arising from the financial services post-Brexit? And maybe we'll look at that from a point of view of France as well. So again, interested in your views on that.
Well, maybe expanding on a bit on the last answer. As I said, we have an interest to make sure that we have strong financial services and systems and that we regulate them. We've already seen, you know, capital flows to the European Union, and I've mentioned the share issue. And I think that it is happening, and there are, rather than London being the centre of the European market, as it was when the UK were full members, we are going to see different numbers of centres on particular specialities. I think the question probably also is looking at whether we are deliberately, you know, pushing this, or what is our agenda here. And again, I would repeat that in these early days, our specific purpose was to ensure financial stability, particularly in this era of COVID, because there are lots of moving parts that could cause instability. We are then going to have to see where specific infrastructure that is in the UK, whether that needs to be within the European Union, so we have better oversight of it. And these will be issues that will cause tensions between us as partners, but we will make the decisions based on what we think is necessary for ourselves. To be fair to both the banks and the financial system, and indeed the Commission's preparatory work, we didn't see that any difficulties thus far. There are some issues that are arising, but in my view, there's no need for urgent action. There's also, and this may sound a little bit painful if you're a UK listener, and I mean it with absolute respect, is that once you leave the European Union, you lose everything that comes with being a member of the European Union by choice, because you voted to leave, and that's something we respect. And therefore, there's no sense in which my team or I or this commission will want to recreate the same conditions post-Brexit. So, you know, change has happened, more change will happen. And maybe the piece that none of us fully understand is the impact of digitalization on the rate of change. Digital currencies, these things are enormous big issues. We have more questions than answers. And they will probably be global, but certainly at a European level, we are looking at all of this advance to see how we, you know, use the best of technology and take all the innovations that come with it, but equally measure the risks and be quite clear that these risks have to be mitigated and we have to regulate in a way where they don't run out of control. So yes, to change, definitely, as to which part, when, how, this will all unfold as it has already. But I don't see a big bang moment or anything like that. I think even within financial houses, banks and other institutions, they're having these conversations as well. And I have been clear in my hearing, and I've been clear since the start of this year as to what our purpose is. And we haven't changed from that. And I look forward to sitting down with my UK counterparts to working on specific issues, to being able to deal with them, respecting each other's different perspectives, but perhaps bearing in mind how we need to protect the system from vulnerabilities that could arise where we don't reach agreement.
No, thank you, Mairéad. And I think, you know, we see certainly in the island of Ireland, again, you know, seeing over the last couple of days that in Belfast, a lot more financial organizations are coming there. And we see digitalization, even very simply, if you want to give somebody some money, you know, you do something on a card. It's a very different way of moving money around. So certainly the constraints and the challenges and the opportunities are vastly different. Just moving on to capital markets. How do you hope as Commissioner to progress Capital Markets Union, given the political constraints?
Well, look, everything about Europe has constraints and they're usually political, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a joint acceptance that we need a strong capital markets union. So then what you do, you bite off what you can choose. So you do a step-by-step approach. I think, again, speaking of COVID and the need for a recovery, we need to get more finance flowing so that we can have this recovery, but also recovery that addresses the green, the environmental climate goals and the digitalization. So we know that there are barriers, including legal barriers within member states to capital flows. So that is quite a difficult political conversation where change has got to be made at the national level. But like with banking union, there is a strong commitment to have stronger capital markets. And equally, Brexit, I think, has also made the issue, I suppose, to the fore. So we're even talking with the insurance industry, for example, to see can we review the legislative framework to allow for long-term investments that go towards our overall agenda and targets. And public finances are already stretched because of COVID. So we know that there will need to be much more than public money into these investments. We need strong levels of private money going in as well. So it won't happen overnight. It will happen piece by piece. And it's, in my view, it's part of this banking union discussion as well. So banking union, capital markets union. And again, on banking union, everybody wants to see it achieved, but there are individual issues for particular member states. What Europe does well, and again, the ambassador will know the behind the scenes work that goes on in the Commission, is that when you have an objective and that people have really liked the idea, but they don't want the bits that go with them changing, you work slowly to convince maybe one member state to give that little bit, another joins in. It's quite, in one sense, it sounds tedious, but it's like building consensus. And I often think that during the Brexit debate, which we just referenced, consensus was almost being dismissed as a fault as opposed to a virtue. But actually, I think those who can build consensus and who have the determination and the patience to one step at a time and bring people closer, I think that's really strong. I mean, I think that's positive. I mean, yesterday, for example, in the Competitiveness Council, a tricky issue on country by country reporting of tax, which, indeed, the member state I know best wasn't supporting for legal basis reasons and many other reasons, a number of other member states. But gradually over the last while, some have come on board. So we now have more member states supporting this. And I think citizens want it as well. So again, that's part of the work, if you like, that we do here and around capital markets. It's the same issue. So we review every so often, we take one step forward. And because I come from the Parliament, my connections are strong there. And I really do listen to what the Parliament is saying with the council, and then we try and strategize to make that much needed progress, because a lot of our agenda here in FISMA, the investments towards climate neutrality and the enormous change that we all face, I don't think we've taken this on board. It is going to be breathtaking. And if it doesn't work, then it's a tragedy, and we can't allow that happen, because the destination has to be by 2050. I think that, once you know that that is the destination and target, then you have to find a way of facilitating these flows. And at the moment, a lot of people who are still working have a lot of money on deposit, vast sums on deposit, not earning much. So we need to unlock that. We need to create a culture where people are willing to invest in businesses. There's a very different culture in the US. I don't think we can recreate what they have, because it would not be European, but we should try and encourage. And I even hear my children, my adult children, if you like, talking about the stock market and shares in a way that I certainly didn't at that stage. It must be coming up for them in their social media fields. And they're the generation, in terms of pension adequacy, really going to be a difficult issue. We all know this is one that is very trying. It's also part of our general conversations on the RRF, this fund to promote the recovery that Europe is working on and member states are putting in their plans. So I mean, there's an entire, if you like, pressure towards a bigger and more liquid, deeper capital markets, and we will get there, step by step.
Yeah, and we see it as well. I certainly see it in business, that the ESG agenda is becoming just so big, and the social impact part is very much tied in with the environmental part. So thank you for that. And I think you answered really the next question, which was around banking union. So I won't go back into that one. The next question put by our audience was that.
Hello.
Can you hear us okay?
Just one sec.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
Take a
Margot,
minute.
can you hear me now?
I can hear you perfectly, Mairéad.
That's the time I wasn't so calm.
Don't worry, it's fine. We're the ambassador and I are old hands at this stage. We will keep going. And thanks everybody for bearing with us. So Mairéad, the next question was really coming back to the pandemic, because obviously it's still in so many people's minds. It's not over until it's managed for all. So the person who asked the question was interested in the EU's position on COVAX.
Yeah, well, look, I think it's absolutely true that it's not over until everyone is vaccinated, and that also we have a way of rolling vaccinations in the eventuality of new mutations, and we know that that is the case. Europe is very supportive of the COVAX project. We have injected significant sums of money into it. And again, the president here has been very much talking to global leaders about the need to finance the vaccinations. Sadly, the first deliveries are only this week. It would have been good if they'd happened earlier. And here's the dilemma for us, whether you're in France or Ireland, or wherever you are listening to this. I made this comment on radio recently that if we were truly wanting to serve the global need, we would say, let's vaccinate our vulnerable, our healthcare workers, those that are vital to keeping us all going, and then maybe allow everyone globally in that category to be vaccinated before we move on. But unfortunately, that's not how we behave. I suppose people are very keen to be vaccinated, and because we have access to vaccines now, they will flow, will be quite a significant flow of vaccinations. Ireland, France, will have plenty, and those excess vaccinations need to go as part of our additional effort towards countries that have nothing at the moment. You know, in one sense, the developing world, as we call it, or our near neighbours, they've dealt with pandemics in the past. We kind of would watch it on telly but not feel it. So they've more experience of dealing with these things every so often and terrible public health consequences. And they're probably more patient than we are. But I do think between the European Union, the US, I think there is a more global view about this pandemic only being, if you like, fully dealt with when everybody gets vaccinated, or at least we have a maximum amount who are willing to be vaccinated. And I think that it would have been better had we been able to do this earlier. I think COVAX itself as a mechanism, it just was slower to get up and running, which is why the public health measures are so important. And I think we still need to adhere to that. So I'm happy to be mask free just now, but the minute this ends, I'm back to wearing the mask. Yeah, I think we need a good discussion about that. I think it's very difficult to be a leader in national politics at the moment, because you have a duty to your own citizens. You're also mindful of this greater global question. And how do you, at a time when people are anxious and worried, and every age group is going through difficult times, the child at 3, 13, I'll repeat a line that a commissioner colleague used, that for a 17-year-old, you're 17 once, but you're 51 forever, in the sense that there's a whole loss to them. A year is a long, long time. So they want vaccination as well. So I think it's just a challenge for us, but I'm proud that Europe has put this money in, not just this week. This is a commitment going back to last year, and in fact would have been one of the driving forces behind it. And I'm also mindful of those who listen to the World Health Organization, and one of the leading commentators there is an Irish doctor, Dr. Ryan. I mean, he made some very challenging remarks to all of us in this part of the world about what's happening around pandemics and vaccines and access to healthcare. And the last remark I would say is that I think business now, in a way you mentioned so rightly, Margot, that ESG issues are now really important, because fundamentally the pandemic closed businesses. So in other words, it's actually a financial issue as well as a health issue. And therefore, I think there may be a different perspective when we're planning our recovery than in the past. And indeed, I think there needs to be a different perspective, because the causes of this crisis, which we don't know the full extent of, because the public purse is funding jobs and businesses, and that's absolutely vital. But it is a very different cause than the last crisis, where you could blame, reckless lenders or whatever. And I think that the, societal impacts and the political consequences of how that is dealt with could be quite important and need to be carefully considered, as well as considering our wider, if you like, duty to parts of the world where they don't have access to vaccines, and we need to make sure that they do.
Yeah, and I think that's really coming to the fore. I was listening to the IBEC conference yesterday, and you had, on one hand, you had business on, and then you had Trócaire, and the perspective from the developing world, and then the juxtaposition of business and the economic worries and public health. So I think these are going to become very, very sort of all parts in this discussion as we move forward. I'll take one more question from the ones we got previous, and then I'll just have a look, because I see some more have come in. Cleona, how are we on time? Have we got about...
Well, we're just at the end, really. So I think maybe we do have a question here that might be a nice one to pose as well. Does the Commissioner see long-term initiatives ongoing which will stem the increasing inequality across society in Europe?
Oh, it's a huge question. And maybe, you've just actually, Margot, with the comments you've made, I think there's now almost an awakening in many citizens, companies, financial institutions. In the past, they might have said nice things in financial reports and lovely speeches. But actually, I think now is a time of great possibility to address those issues, which not just climate, environment, biodiversity, but social issues and inequality. homelessness, all of these things that are a huge, they're a blight on society. We should have dealt with them. We shouldn't have these problems. We see also, and maybe I should have referenced that, this crisis has seen an increase in domestic violence. So women are vulnerable, mainly women and children in their own homes. That's an issue that needs to be addressed. So I think the recovery, however we plan it and whenever it begins, needs to take account of all of those factors. That inequality, if it's allowed to persist and prevail, well, it's just morally unacceptable, and because you destroy rather the lives of so many. So young children born into that don't have access to education. I mean, it's a whole knock-on effect. I think there's more awareness of that. Interesting, we have a task force or a platform on sustainable finance, and one of the issues they're looking at is a social taxonomy. So we're looking at obviously a climate one, and that's more technical and criteria, but we're also extending that to social issues. So that's going to be quite interesting. And I think companies now will need to report, not just the nice to have things, but that it's embedded in their culture, in their leadership, and that what they write, they say. And I think this is where the world is at the moment. So all of our talk around change, around climate, all of these big targets, we've said what we're going to do. Now the hard part, do it. And I think what I'm really pleased with and privileged in a way is that it is the financial system that will drive change. So when and if we can get the money to look towards sustainability and all of those social issues as well, because it's a long-term future rather than a short-term gain, then I think we will have, we will make that progress that's absolutely necessary. But there certainly is an awful lot of work to do, I always believe that if you could help families that are vulnerable, if you can inject support, at that early stage to support families, I think that's hugely important. And it literally rewards beyond monetary value. And that's the other part. I think that in future, and the not too distant future, we will have a system of, the financial reporting, clear, that's always necessary, and the non-financial reporting, and they will be on an equal footing. Now, I think 20 years ago, we wouldn't have said that. I mean, when I was studying accountancy, it was return on investment and all of those other targets. But now we're saying, actually, no, we need the balance. And we need the balance of both, and that businesses are part of the community and society, and in as much as they take from and they need to give back. So there's that two-way flow, and I think you'll get better business. It just will be better. I think equally, if you look after your employees well, if you ask how people are, if you smile even, you might get a reward for that. So I think it's about just putting it all together, and I think maybe this moment, COVID, other things that have happened globally, the return of America perhaps to this more the global stage, I think this is perhaps a good time to have hope that we will see this fundamental change that is needed. And here and the team that I'm working with, I think if in a few years' time I can look back and say, gosh, we're part of that turning the ship, if you like, while keeping it afloat, I think that would be a wonderful moment.
Wow. Well, that leaves us with great hope, from a point of view of the conversations that we've been having. And I think when you see Larry Fink from BlackRock really thinking about the environment and investment and then moving into a whole different way, conversations about basic income and looking at universality, I think we have there's a vision again for the world and for a way forward. I'm conscious that I think we've probably come to the end of our time. I just want to take a really, moment to say a really big thank you to you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mairéad. We really, it's meant a lot to our community to have you come and talk to us this morning. And I think your openness and your sharing with us has really been appreciated by everybody. And Ambassador, thank you as well so much, and for always turning up for us and being there. And I leave it with Cleona just to close out, and thank you both so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you very much.
Yes, and thank you, Commissioner, for joining us today, Mairéad, and thank you, Ambassador, and also Margot as President of the Chamber. And it's so good to finish on a hopeful note. and on a positive note, and really appreciate the EU perspective on these very, very important topics. Thank you, everyone, and especially to so many of you who joined us today. I know there's lots of you out there listening in. I'm sorry we didn't get to all your questions. We have run out of time, but we do wish you from here in sunny Bray a very sunny weekend. Bon weekend. Merci beaucoup à tout le monde. À très bientôt, j'espère. Merci. Au revoir.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Bon weekend.
Bonne journée.
Thank you, Commissioner, again.
Bye.
Thank you, Margaret.